Good afternoon, everyone. In today's video, we're going to be using our free Anchored VWAP indicator, anchor that to the March 2020 lows, and try and see which markets are getting close to that volume-weighted average price. Now, for those of you that don't have the Anchored VWAP indicator, you can download it for free from our website. This includes the latest updated version, which also works with extended hours. Now, let's come back inside of our charts. I have the Anchored VWAP loaded on, and I have the anchor date as March 19th, 2020. Don't really care about the anchor time since we're looking on a daily time frame chart here. Now, if I click OK, the way I'm going to go through this is cycle through first the four major index markets, then we'll move on to things like gold, silver, basically the futures markets that we take a look at, before then diving into sectors. Now, my goal in this exercise is to go through this fairly quickly, and I think you'll notice really one of two things, or one of two buckets. Bucket number one, we're close or really hovering near the Anchored VWAP, and bucket number two is going to be the markets in which we're well below the Anchored VWAP. You'll also find really a bucket three where we're above the VWAP, but that's much less frequent, especially right now with the March 2020 lows. So using really those three buckets, but primarily these two, let's dive in here. I'll load in our liquid futures watch list. Let's go ahead and expand this. And we can start by going through these markets here first. Now, first market we'll take a look at is the S&P 500 futures, anchoring to the March lows. Price here is in bucket number one, really. We're right near that anchored volume weighted average price level. We're also near the 1272. So I would expect a little bit of a bounce from this level. That's an idea I've already explored. At this point, we're just adding additional reasons why we think that bounce is likely to occur. Now, if you contrast the S&P though with some of the other index markets, so the Dow looks very similar, but if I switch over to, say, the NASDAQ, much more different inside of the NASDAQ here. If I clean up the charts just a tad, in fact, let me just remove all of our drawings so we can see the NASDAQ for what it is. Inside of the NASDAQ, we're well below that anchored VWAP price. In fact, quite a ways away from it. So in terms of where our volume-weighted average price is closer to that March 2020 lows, a place where you might be a little bit more confident in terms of buying the dip, that's where I would so far rank the S&P and the Dow over the NASDAQ. Now, the Russell market, I think, really highlights what we were hoping to see here, which is the anchored VWAP acts as support once, twice, three times, then we finally break below it, and now we're really looking at that as a potential resistance. So that's how I think you can use the anchored VWAP for markets in which we're well below, as well as the markets in which it may act as support. Now, moving on next to gold here. Gold, that March 2020, doesn't really hold as much of an important bearing compared to, say, the S&P 500. There, if we look at gold has really just been chopping around that volume weighted average price, and that's been that magnet line now ever since really 2020. So that's been going on for quite some time. To contrast that with silver, that March low looks a little bit more defined, and we're now well below that March low. We also have this downward trend line in which if we did get this bounce, eventually it might make sense that price rallies into that VWAP as it closes. It might be that third bounce into the trend line if you were looking for a counter trend play. So far inside of the indices, we've seen the S&P, the Dow close to the VWAP, the NASDAQ below the VWAP, the Russell below the VWAP, gold really just chopping around sideways, silver below the VWAP where we'd almost be looking at that as a resistance. Now if I move on next to crude oil, inside of crude, there the VWAP is still well below. We have a lot of room left inside of crude. And you'll see this is true in XLE here as well when we get to the sector portion. Now, if you contrast crude, though, with copper, that's where I think this gets interesting. Copper, we're bouncing into that VWAP now for the first time. Makes a lot of sense for copper here to bounce. Some other interesting ways you might play this if you do believe in this idea. Something like FCX, where inside of FCX here, we're also bouncing inside of that March 2020 VWAP level. So I think copper is one interesting place where that opportunity is happening for the first time right now with some individual stocks that you can take advantage of this move with. Also, HG, before I move on, one other reason I think it looks interesting, if I load in, say, just our basic indicator set here, what you should notice is price inside of copper, if I load in the extended Keltner channels as well, is now extended, and we're getting that V-shaped reversal pattern starting to form, at least the first part of it. We're starting to see this small little cup here. This is telling us we're outside of the 3.0 extended Keltner channels indicator, and we're now looking for really this green arrow to suggest this bounce. So for those, again, bringing the idea of copper, it's near the anchored VWAP level. We're starting to get this V-shaped reversal pattern forming. We still have the trigger that we're waiting for, and you have individual stocks to play that move. So copper looks very interesting to me here. Now coming back inside of our indicators, let me bring back in the anchored VWAP here, and we can set that right back to the date of March 19th and continue moving forward with now our sector analysis. So copper here looks interesting, and hopefully this illustrates why. Now if I start from the sectors here, and I'll just go straight down the line, first off we have XLP. XLP, if I zoom in, has already bounced from that VWAP, and we're now really looking for that second retest of the VWAP level. So whether or not it bounces from there, a little bit less confident, especially considering the way XLP has been moving recently. XLE, quite a bit of distance from that VWAP here, from that March 2020, similar to the crude oil charts that we were taking a look at. XLF, a little bit different, very similar to copper. One more time, looks fairly interesting here for a bounce, and I think XLF would be another sector that you might find some interesting opportunities in, looking for a shorter term bounce. XLV already bounced, similar to the XLP chart that we just took a look at. XLI now below the VWAP level, where you might expect this to start to act as a bit of resistance, which is already done one time if I zoom in with this candle right here. Now, next up, materials, now falling inside of the VWAP level as well, so another interesting sector where you might find opportunities. So far, just to recap, we have copper, XLF, and XLB. Next up, XLRE, starting to get below that level. Chart doesn't look as clean compared to some of these other sectors. XLU has already bounced. XLY, well below the anchored VWAP. So here we can see definitive weakness, especially when you contrast it with some of the other sectors that we've just taken a look at. XLK, bouncing into the levels, but it's looking like we may be really breaking below the VWAP here, especially if the NASDAQ continues to keep breaking down. XLC, same idea as XLY, well below the anchored VWAP level. And finally, the retail sector below as well. So to recap, there are really three markets where I thought you had some interesting opportunities. The first we saw was copper, where you had both HG along with FCX. That shouldn't be a slash, that's more like an and symbol. So HG would be the futures market, or FCX if you're looking for individual stocks, or you might even find some ETFs like PIC to be an interesting choice. Next up, we had XLF. XLF, also another interesting sector where you could have some opportunities setting up based off of that VWAP bounce. Coming back to a chart here, looks a lot cleaner, also falling into a previous price level that we have, which is really just this high extended out. And then finally, XLB, where we're having price fall into the VWAP levels. So hopefully this gives you a few different places, again, a different lens or a different perspective, using the volume weighted average price anchored to March 19th, 2020, and we're now looking to see where is price falling inside of that volume weighted average price. One more time, you can download the anchored VWAP indicator from our website, and we also have a scan that you might find useful if you are looking to learn a little bit more around using the anchored VWAP. Take care everyone, good luck trading, and I'll see you in the next update.